So welcome to our first proper art dialogue with Dr Alastair Herron from Ulster University. He's a fine art lecturer. I'm really pleased to welcome him this evening. Hello, Alastair.
Hello, Sandy. Thank you.
I'm going to launch straight in, as you know, and ask you about this wonderful but kind of strange photograph. Why did you choose to share this with us on the first slide?
Yeah, that's a good question you asked, Sandy. It comes from, I suppose it backdates to when I was at school. I attended quite a dreadful secondary school in Belfast here, and I remember being told by teachers that in nature there was no straight lines. And many, many decades later, I happened to have the opportunity of walking in the Pyrenees Alps, and suddenly there manifested a number of clouds that were breaking up. And this was as is. It isn't sort of altered. It was cropped a little, but and this square cloud appeared, and it was like I suppose a validation or some sort of an epiphany, as I was maybe mentioning, that here was nature that was saying, yeah, look, we do squares as well. And I find that quite an interesting intervention, that nature and the tradition, I suppose, of landscape photography, and prior to that, landscape painting, has not really been, I suppose, manifest in this manner. So the visuality was square, and I continued that theme in a certain way in order to break up what nature does. I do feel that nature draws a person out rather, and what I mean by drawing a person out, it's a kind of erasure, a silence, a pause, and a space. This notion of spatiality, I think, is very, very important.
I am curious with this image. When you saw it, I love the story of, kind of the validation after all those years. Teachers were wrong. Here it is. Here's my moment.
Yeah.
Were you actually thinking about that when you saw it? Is that what made you see it?
No, we're just walking along. It's a place called Murin, near Interlaken, and I like to do a lot of walking, and as I say, had the opportunity of walking in these Alps, and it just arose out of the valley. There were these images, and I went, "Wow, that's unbelievable!" And took the image drew itself, and I was lucky enough to be in its presence, so to speak. So
what I wonder though did you kind of ascribe a narrative after seeing, or was the narrative present in the choice of seeing?
I think the narrative was present by its own nature, Sandy, that the sense of its kind of origination manifested that there's a camera and an image creation available to it, onto it, was happenstance in that manner. And I feel that was, and it was great. And the feeling of nature, one's own nature, in nature, as nature. And this, maybe this, I mean, I'm putting I suppose, a sense of personification or anthropocentrism on it. But yet in all, I mean, it is actually what it is. It's an image of nature manifesting a cloud as a square.
Well, I found it completely unbelievable. When I spoke to you about it, I said to you, did you manipulate this? What did you do?
Yeah.
And I was really surprised to find that it is just as it happened.
Yeah, no manipulation. That's how it was. That's how it is. Yeah, sure.
Can I ask you, when we look at any of your images that you've shared with us, is there ever any post-production manipulation? Is there ever any editing out or away of what you have seen?
No, apart from cropping, a little bit of cropping on it, no. And maybe there might be a little bit of color correction, but generally no. Because the nature would draw out its sense. And again, following on with this particular image, it follows on with this disrupting what people might like to see as a balance, as it like a rule of thirds, to say in the center of it, it's a tree that's moving through different densities. So, to the frame right, you have the forest, and then you have this tree trunk, and then to the left, this whiteness, this space, which I think it seems to be commenting on that thing about space, that element of silence, of quietness, of pause, that it feels very redolent I feel that the quality of silence, the quality of creativity, the etymology of the word creativity is something out of nothing, is in all art practice, even within music, within poetry, the suggestiveness of that, but within the visuality, within the ocular tradition or the ocular unfoldment, you have this referencing to white, to space, and with then a realist image, but also an abstraction. So you've got this sort of within one frame, a contradiction between what one might see as a tree, an identified forest, and then a narrative going along, reading actually from right to left rather from left to right into this whiteness, which underpins it all in a sense. So the space, no matter what it is, non-space has space. The space between the viewer and the view, the photographer and the photographing, the photographing, and the thinker and the thought. The quality of that space, I think, is quite interesting and can manifest itself.
I am curious in the moment of taking it, though, whether you are taking a photograph, making art, seeing and experiencing what those things mean to each other, and whether when you saw this through your lens, you were seeing it already flattened and therefore somehow appreciated it differently than it actually is.
I don't know. Again, I feel that the quality of creativity, I think we were saying that it isn't so much capturing or taking an image, but the image draws itself. So the compositional value, which can be put on later, but I do feel that when people are engaged with creativity, there's an absenting of the actual person, that the artist or the photographer, in a sense, destroys themselves, erases themselves. They're drawn out. So there's that quietness, that stillness that engages very much with creativity. It's the creativity that makes it, not the person, I feel, if that makes sense to you.
I'm curious about this as well, though, and forgive me if I'm slow-brained with this, but is this a creation of quietness? And if so, how can that be?
Well, it's an unfoldment of the visual. It's an unfoldment of what the vision is there, irrespective of us putting a name or an idea on it, or a thought, or a form of memory. That it isn't memory. It's in a sense devoid of that. So the instant of space, the instant, which is what we're both in now, in a sense, this sense of space, is very real. It's quite visceral, but it's super real in the sense that it's not only so-called outside, it's also inside. So it's between someone making a consideration or a countenancing nature, in particular, non-man-made reality that's present. So it's space presenting. If I'm trying to simplify it without complicating. I'm sorry if that sounds very convoluted and complicated. It's just that the presenting of space is ever present. It doesn't, and that things move through that, not the other way around. I think one tends to think possibly I'm an artist and I'm making a decision here. That may not be the case.
This is so interesting for me as a follow-up interview to speaking to my friend Philip Tunner, who talked to me about Heidegger and context and the artist being engaged in context. And I hope I don't misrepresent what he said at all. But what you're saying is about the immediacy of being, and that the art is not separate.
Yeah, and even that the sense of being is to do more with space rather than actually being. That there's a sense before being, if you want. And I think that's personified, not even personified. It's there. It's present, and it can be called silence. It can be called a pause. It can be called space. And the name, the description, as I think. Krishnamurti would have said, the description isn't the described, or Kurbotsky would have said, the map is not the territory. or yeah, this is not a pipe. Magritte would say, so the description, how we describe things is not it. So even though this is a two-dimensional image and it suggests perspective, foreground and background, the essence of space that holds it, and that's maybe emphasized by the white to an extent, and the snow, and the deliberate presentation of the tree, is also the space when the viewer looks at that is the same space, or the viewer thinks about that.
Are we moving into this space though? When you sent these photographs to me, and I spent time with this one, I was puzzled at first, and I did that immediate thing that I think a lot of art inquirers do, is I wanted to try and work it out. But I had a sensation of not moving. Yet here you are talking about distance.
Yeah, that's correct. I am talking about distance, but puzzlement is a sense of not knowing. And that sense of not knowing is also the space, is also the silence. So it isn't arriving at an answer, it's a questioning. So visual questioning is very important. Visual inquiry, which I think all art does, it leaves open in any form. It opens up a question, and a question is not to know. And I think that's quite interesting. A lot of people want to know the answer, or they want to be a thing. I feel that life and nature in particular is not of that, and our real nature is not of that. It's of the space of questioning without knowing, and that can be tricky for a lot of people. We don't like not to know sometimes, but I think artists are quite brave, and photographers can be quite, explorative in their intent, and they can I suppose challenge themselves, and I think that's what good art does.
Will I move on to the next one?
Please. Yeah, surely. Yeah, so taking the notion of line and deliberate disturbing or disrupting this sense, the square, if you go back, the square cloud, the framed tree trunk in the snow. So this notion of one, if we look at Parmenides, if you go back to the Eleatics, I suppose their school of philosophy, it was about the same time as Buddha and Lao Tzu. They had this feeling of one. In fact, early pre-Socratic philosophy is based on poetry. Parmenides actually wrote poetry that was on nature, the fragments that have come down to us. But it was very much to do with this sense of one, as I read it anyway, and a sense of space, a sense of that things pass through, change happens, but there's a constancy of oneness. And this deliberate one it's prefigured by the tree trunk, which is cut, and this strange light. It's almost like someone has placed a light there, which didn't happen. It's actually natural light coming in. Refers to the frame. So the four lines of the frame are indicated by this, and it's a central aspect too. So that it's compositionally could be seen to be quite odd. This one line. Again,
well, I have to say, strangely enough, again, looking at the photographs when you sent them, I initially read this as two images.
Great. That's great. No, that's. I mean, that's.
In fact, actually, can I just admit something here now, Alastair? You'll find this hilarious. I'm looking at this now and listening to you talking, and only just now am I realizing that it's one image. Because if you look at the delineation in the middle, obviously
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I mean, what I think good about what your insight is opening up is that this be able to hold two images in one together. I think is quite an interesting feat, which is what I think from the point of view of a lot of modernists, especially early 20th century art forms, be it in literature. I'm thinking of Gertrude Stein or James Joyce, going into the consciousness, how we think, there's this sort of internal monologue going on, or, the Cubists, Braque and Picasso, taking their lead from Paul Cézanne, that it's to do, and this disruption of time within space, different layers of time, that people are trying to come to a learning. How do we match what we're thinking, these thoughts that are supposedly these personalizing thoughts, and then that matching with some sort of exterior, interior? That a lot of the modernists are dealing with this at the turn of the century, at the fin de siècle. When you have changes in things like Freud's interpretation of dreams or Einstein's, discovery with quantum physics, it's an interesting period. And I feel that where contradiction can be seen, two things seen as one. It's quite quantum in many respects, and showing that ambiguity, that challenge, again, referring to what you said previously, I think about the importance of questioning and not knowing. That, is it two images? Is it one? And to be able to have that combinational. I mean, I'm not saying it is two images, but
well, I think the other thing is, I mean, to be very boring for a second and just talk purely visually, that there's above the line of the cut trunk, there is actually also an ending of another branch.
Yeah.
And right. It aligns so perfectly. What I would say also, though, about this idea, when I did believe it to be the two images that you had spliced together, that actually I was kind of entering a zone of the between space. But again, entering implies a movement there. Yeah. But I was going into it. I was going into that line space, that moment of interconnection that is also nothing. And I speak a lot to especially A-level students about this idea that there's a moment of nothing. You've already talked about quietness or silence before being, even. That it's kind of like the horizon line. What's there? You can go up to it and you can walk along it like a tightrope. Of course you can. It's the line of everything and nothing. And actually, in this, I thought you'd quite deliberately drawn me to that. Right. And yet here's this whole other layer of it coming out now, which is that actually I'm completely misleading myself based on how I want to see the image, maybe.
I don't know. I think the line of nothing, which is a beautiful term, and to introduce other learners to that is excellent. I think it falls within the same as in the notion of the one in the space. Indeed, you could say that the concept, like Alberti, the concept of perspective, of, if you want, background, foreground, background, midground, foreground, and the compression of that, the compressing whereby images do compress. So is it an abstract image? Is it figurative? And that ambiguity, or is it that that line of nothing, or spatial dislocation, but coming back to space? I think coming back to that question is quite interesting.
I was thinking when I was looking at it, and I'm sure most art learners do this. Certainly, it's a practice that I would encourage, is that you look at something and you do make connections to other things you may have seen. And that's part of meeting a criteria, obviously, for our teaching and learning as examiners and assessors. But when I looked at this, I was thinking the whole time of Barnett Newman with his zips of paint. Or I was thinking, even knowing your connection to Krishnamurti, I was thinking even about Agnes Martin and the idea that there are lines and delineations that are like you could slip through the crack of them into something completely unknown, and that you give, or I give myself up into that.
Yeah, as that, I would say not only Agnes Martin, more so probably Agnes Pelton, if you know. Do you know Agnes Pelton?
No.
It was around the same time. It would have been a desert transcendentalist. She was a contemporary of Georgia O'Keeffe, but was quite shy. And her desert paintings are amazing. And not only that, delineate, they would go back to Hilma of Klimt, where you're talking about. I mean, this great, rich, thankfully being rediscovered of very visionary women. Like Emma Kuntz, but Agnes Pelton's practice was exemplary, because she did, very realist to make money as a painter. She did paintings in the desert. That's where she lived, in Arizona. But she also did these incredible abstract representations of like the desert at night, but they're very ephemeral. Actually, she went to, you mentioned Krishnamurti. I mean, she actually went to see Krishnamurti in the 1950s, but she's not very well known. She was one of the two people who, I think, of the women that exhibited at the Armory Show, if I'm correct, Georgia O'Keeffe and herself, they both trained with Dove. But she was quite self-effacing. She wasn't really publicized so much. Alfred Stieglitz wasn't taking photographs of Agnes Pelton, so to speak. And it's a pity, although there's a couple of books just recently out on her, and I'm always trying to kind of like, promote Agnes Pelton. But it's quite interesting, her work in that sense. But yes, that coming back to what you said about Agnes Martin, yeah, I do think that although again, it's how we see things, and possibly I think it's what nature draws out from us in that manner of speaking, But
we talked about a year ago now, when we saw each other in person, about the kind of misuse of language is a terrible thing. Essentially, a kind of death to knowing that happens when somebody really cannot understand something.
Yeah, Sandy, again, that comes up to what you're saying about death. It's a strange combination, but death usually in the Western world would be seen as being something to be hidden, maybe in a lot of cultures. Some not so much so, but and so when you equate dying with learning, it's a very strange mix. But if you see that dying is like an ending or similar to not knowing, then I think there can be quite curious correlation.
I'm asking this now at this point, looking at Nothing from Nothing.
Yeah, this is Parmenides. This is a quote from him. This is pre-Socratic quote, nothing from nothing. Nothing proceeds from nothing. And yeah, it's standard in a way. Again, it's like the screen right, where there's the mist and it coming out of that, and this dance of trees, I suppose, leaning over. But it's alluding to the sense of vacancy of space, this spatial consideration, a consideration of space that doesn't have that cannot be precisely placed. It doesn't have that background, midground, foreground, and that sense of also displacing ourselves. So it can be some of it can be quite meditative, I think, and meditative in a sense. I mean, looking at Eastern traditions of, I suppose, yantra or the Tibetan tangas or mandalas. In that sense, you get that in a number of Eastern religions, where they're used as ways to, I suppose, challenge the orthodoxy, the conditionedness of our thinking, of human thinking, and to try to question that. And I think good art, as I repeat myself, but good art does tend to try to open that up. Yeah.
I think some people would find this very difficult as an image. You and I are sitting in our respective homes looking at it, and are we aligned to a way of thinking about it, you and I? Whereas I know that if I were to show this image to other people, they would be deeply frustrated by the lack of purchase on what they can see.
Right. What would that reflect? Would that reflect, I mean, without being disingenuous to our imaginary people, would it reflect their conditioning in a sense? Also, one has expectation. I mean, these images will only go as far as they go, I think, given the turnover of billions of images on a weekly basis. I mean, with the advent of digital photography, there's so much out there. It's challenging to see, but these presentations, if you want, are just like I'm saying about a mandala, are a way of entering in if people wish to do that. But the person does it for themselves. It isn't that one is showing them. and sometimes you can come up against imagery that is challenging, and it might be useful not to just feel what that challenge is. So if one's challenged by any image or any unusual art forms or other forms, hopefully in a non-violent manner, that's the richness of living, I think. You know, and especially nature, I think, is redolent with that a lot. We don't really engage with where our nature comes from. You know, our nature in nature, our nature as nature. It's so vital because it's changing so much and offers so much. But yeah, we're heavily conditioned to have certain expectation, and I think art, you know, makes an intervention there for some. Not only art, I mean, it can be people get an epiphany or get insight through all sorts of things. You know, things appear strange. There's a great poem by Rumi about, I think it's geese that are flying, but it's one of the geese is slightly, it maybe has a fault in its wing, and that stands out. You know, the strange thing, the broken pattern. You know, it's like Persian carpet, where they apparently deliberately make a little miscorrection on it, or wabi sabi, that Japanese, you know, deliberate, you know.
But in giving up into something, like, you know, into a voluntary state of poverty or whatever it's going to be, there's so much fear, isn't there? You know, and again, I don't want to simplify what you're saying, which is very deeply resonating. The fear, I think, in images like this, I have to say, whether this is right or wrong doesn't matter, but I could say, again, looking at the images you sent beforehand and seeing this one, even without Nothing from Nothing, immediately understanding that I was able to engage with something, and then beyond that, there was nothing. And I wondered if I was still then engaged, or if I was in this other place, or if indeed I was anywhere, or what that meant. And it reminded me very much of being at the Hayward Gallery in the South Bank and going to see an Anthony Gormley exhibition. And there was, I can't remember what it's called, but it was a big glass room, and it was filled with white fog. And the audience were invited to enter the room. And the fog was so dense that you really couldn't see your hand, even if it was, you know, centimeters away from your face. And truthfully, there were a lot of people in that room who were completely terrified in that white space.
Yeah.
I mean, really frightened.
Sure.
I'm not sure ever if that was like part of the experiment Anthony Gormley wanted to engage in, to see whether white space or emptiness manifested somehow would create a fearful reaction, highly reactive fearfulness in the audience. I found it fascinating, but I do get the same sense from this. I think a lot of people would, I said the word challenging earlier, but I think it is fear. Like, as you said something about it earlier, you know, fear of the unknown, of course.
Yeah, I think the fear, that sort of fear is, I think we tend to distance ourselves from fear. We're talking about death. That is the fear different from us, and that, you know, one is the fear, and it, I mean, that's easily said. People have a lot of apprehension about things. But as a person, maybe meeting something, I think Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can hurt you without your own approval. So that sense of fear is, it can be there, but it can be interesting also for people to, like, if they can, to look at it, you know, really. It's a bit like, in a sense, I suppose, I mean, Kant talks about the sublime, but if you look at it, children sometimes like to be frightened, you know, they like to be chased, and it's kind of like they're running around, and, you know, woo, to an extent, in a controlled sense, but which is, it's great, you know, we're not, you know, one doesn't frighten a child, but basically that sense of play, where it's, you know, on that liminality, where it's on that knife edge between, is this frightening, or, you know, should I remain there? I mean, it's interesting. Anthony Gormley, who's very interesting, very closely, he really likes, is a film out recently, Infinite Potential. It's about David Bohm, and he had a great interest in, and does have great interest in David Bohm's writings, you know, the quantum physicist. And he would talk about that sort of non-differentiated sense of space, you know, hidden variable, or not the hidden entanglement, you know, within quantum physics. So that sounded like a great. Were you frightened, Sandy? I don't think you probably were, but I'm just.
I would have stayed in there all day. But I don't want to speak too much about that, because I think that then it tips over even into identifying that about myself, tips me over into the identity of being that person.
Do you not think that it would, I mean, that the feeling of it, the quality of not being able to, there's those restaurants, isn't it, that are completely black, you know, they're, no, where you go into a restaurant and there's nothing, you can't see what you're eating, you can't, so all of that's denied, that the expectation, the ocular kind of expectation of sight is not present.
I think what was interesting though about this photograph, and also that Gormley installation, was, you know, when you go for like a meal in the dark, there's something about the blackness and the darkness that I think people bolster themselves against darkness because we understand it so much more than we understand lightness.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Well, what do I know? I'm just speaking.
What do I know? I mean, what do I know?
But I really did see that actually it was completely outside the experience. People's memory was not able to be in play with this. So in the absence of their memory of white, I think, and again, this was an observation for me, I enjoyed being in that space. There were lots of other problems with it, I have to say, though, just as an aside. There were lots of other people who clearly were just there for a bit of a free-for-all grouping session, which was a problem with it. And I think there was a lot of noise about that, actually, online afterwards in various chat rooms, that, you know, I was, you know, somebody groped me in Anthony Gormley's exhibition. But, you know, going back to the kind of pure element of it, that being in white, being in light, and again, the word being is so difficult, but there's no expectation of it. You know, you mentioned expectation before, and I think in darkness, like using as a contrast, actually going into being submerged into black, we actually do experience that. We have a memory of that. And so maybe we're able to overcome a kind of experience hurdle with it, so that we are more readily available to accepting it or thinking we understand it. Whereas with the white, nobody seemed to have any sense of it happening to them before. And it was as if the white was happening to them. And actually, truthfully, I can speak now really genuinely for myself, I felt like the white was happening. Gosh. And then when I look at this photograph, truthfully, there's like an urgency to get past the trees.
Yeah, I mean, maybe also we can bring on blackness by a blink. So the nature of entering darkness, we simply can, we close our eyes. So it's possible for each of us as human beings to, you know, enter darkness.
Yeah. Well, I just mean in that way that we have some purchase on it.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, sure. I think I take your point about like not having purchase again, where possession is not present or is scrambled. I think again it comes back to this uncertainty, apparent uncertainty, and to remain with that uncertain. In fact, uncertainty is how things probably proceed creatively. Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about not putting this in. This is just, I would walk. This is the
This
more
didn't make
normal.
the original edit, did it? This had to come
No,
in
no.
later.
Yeah, yeah. It's just I mean, it was because of the name Commedagh. It's a Slieve is mountain, and Commedagh means watcher or someone watching or waiting. And it was I suppose it was more. It's personification, the notion of a head and light just appearing in these mountains, you know. And it was quite remote. I would go up and walk in the mountains on my own periods, and it could be quite wild. I like that. I very much liked. So it's more,
Is this
yeah.
memorializing? Is this a memento?
Sorry, Sandy, what?
Is this a memento of a
Yeah,
moment?
well, in a way, but it's also like light. Again, it's nature and light, and then suddenly a break in the clouds, snow's coming down, and then there was that great light on Commedagh. And I just thought it's like a watcher, you know, so nature watching. The essence of this seam of a kind of a horizon, and then this little break of white light. And again, it's divided into two, you know, although it's horizontally divided.
Yeah.
So this linear obsession that I'm going through, that there, but within the linear, then the confusion, if you want, you know, or not the confusion, but non-linear, the foreground here. And then, so there's that reading, and then there's the actual reading of a literalism of, okay, there's mountain, there's light, there's bog that's frozen before it. And it's quite high up to begin with. It's moving up towards one of the highest mountains in Ulster, Slieve Commedagh, which is what I was doing. It was quite a struggle, but the light is, yeah, and the silence and the space and nobody else there, which I love, you know, and yeah.
So I know from what you've said to me that you, as I am too, you will probably show this to your students and they'll talk about it as part of a program of study.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a wee bit more about your program of study?
Yeah, well, it's to do with learning nature. So it's the nature of learning. Nature learns, nature teaches, but we also learn our own nature. So learning nature, Sandy, would be that nature is constantly changing. It's what Darwin called the beautiful. There's very little poetry in The Origin of Species, but there is a little bit where he talks about the beautiful ramifications. It's a lovely phrase, beautiful ramifications, nature. And I feel that there are beautiful ramifications as that. But learning our own nature. So there's our nature and there's the apparent external nature, and they should really be one. That's where we come from. And that art can possibly bring that about. This learning nature. Art, the etymology of the word art, I would see as being fitting. What's fitting? Same connection as articulate. So what fits? And it seems to me nature always fits. Even, you know, as decay, as everything, it's total. It's only that our human man-made intervention in certain and deformed ways we don't really understand our true nature, where we're coming from. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing the harm that we are at the moment in this Anthropocene, and with climate crisis, and indeed with COVID. All of that related to our industrialized way of looking at things in mechanistic way, and I feel that comes from a psychological challenge about thinking, and it's amplified, and that division, that we're separated in some way. Whereas when one is in direct, I mean, when this image was taken, it was quite a struggle. You know, one's in an environment that could be quite dangerous. Even, you know, people have died in these mountains. So, but when one is actually actualizing as nature, that the physiology brings a clarity also that isn't personal. That is not personal. It's just nature's making you do that. The breath, all of that lovely interaction. You might like it at the time, but the interaction, you know.
You did say at the beginning of the slide, though, that there was an element of personification. And
well, yeah, there could be. I mean, the bald head, I suppose, that way. Maybe, I don't know.
but also in context of what you're saying about the program of study and why that is the study, you know, the element of emergence from that line space.
Yeah, as a suggestion, and the elements of study is that, I mean, we're saying like Dorothea Lange's thing about Maxim, more or less paraphrased, about when we take an image, or he took an image of himself, that what we're doing is when we're learning ourselves. I mean, we're learning as ourselves. So we're always moving through ourselves in a way. We don't, I think it was Agnes Nin, she said, when we see as things, you know. So it's, as often as not, we think learning is something separate from us, you know, or it's an object, we objectify it. And I don't think that's what real learning is.
No.
It's much more live. It's a live quality, and silence and space and nature is live, and it doesn't have an answer. It's, you know, it's fantastic.
When you're teaching and your students are talking to you about, you know, how do I realize something visual from something actual? The visual isn't separate from the actual, and the being isn't separate from the making. How do you bring a student to a realization in their work?
I don't think you can. I think, I mean, actually at the moment I'm doing a lot of theory. I don't see any difference, Sandy, between theory and practice, okay? But I do feel that all that one can do is to facilitate and enable, and say, I don't know, I'm also a learner, and I'm a well-paid, or a paid learner anyway, excuse me, but that we can just facilitate and show and say, consider this. I'm sure you do. I mean, I know you do this because I've seen some of your excellent teaching material, that you're able to, you're facilitating and enabling the learners to unfold their own meaning, their own consciousness, their own sensations, and they would be key phrases in the teaching that I'm currently doing. The notion of, and it's about culture, it's about sense, meaning, and consciousness in nature, specifically in nature, because I think doubly so because our planet is under incredible pressure and stress at the moment. We're obsessed with consumerism, and the global model isn't working and won't work, and it needs addressal. And I think art is moving towards addressing that in many respects. And nature needs, you know, we need to get, you know, see that nature, learn our nature as nature, you know, through that. Yeah, this would be very standard, I suppose. It's coming from like, I don't know, Minor White's work, or even like Stieglitz's equivalencies. Floating world, okoye, the Japanese notion of floating world. So the ambiguity, what is it? You know, if you look at, people might look at this and go, this scrambles me. Is it a river? Is it a reflection? Are the black lines? So the ambiguity of, this is the River Lagan, actually. It's the river runs through Belfast, but up back a bit, you know, when it isn't as wide. But yeah, it's the floating world, you know, so we don't, it doesn't give any exactitude as regards in relationship to what is a horizon. So moments of just objects floating. And again, like you're saying about earlier, the image where you thought it might be two. With this one, there's some identifiable natural form, but there's also natural form that is just, what is that? And that sense of someone coming to that and considering it, that contradiction, visual contradiction, could create a visual inquiry for them.
I'm curious about visual contradiction.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
All right. Yeah, okay. Well, where one is expecting a realist, conditioned landscape, and one doesn't get that. So there's a contradiction between the conditioning that one might come to and the expectations, and then that expectation isn't there. So it's a contradiction between the abstract and the representative. So there's representative features within this, but there's also abstract features within it, and they coexist. And so that contradiction, in looking at it, might open up. And the contradiction, another word for contradiction, is simply not knowing. In that sense, it isn't dialectical, it's more dialogical.
I'm wondering also if, you know, I know we've still got several slides to look at with new photographs, but is there a thematic concern then? Would you say, you know, could you bunch all of these together?
I would say it's space. It's the open space, nature drawing out. Nature draws out. I don't take. It's not a matter of taking or capturing a photograph. It's the sense. Maybe this is totally pretentious, but it's the sense of. It's a realized sense of being as nature in nature, and that's drawn out. And I think when people, I mean, I've taken groups of students out into the woods, into different natural environments, and you know, when they're learning, there seems to be that silence and that engagement. They're suspending the tsunami of thoughts and the sense of just direct engagement with this, with the reality that is there as them, with them, unfolds. It isn't thought out. It's not. That's suspended. So I feel that's what's calling, and it's collective. I think I feel it isn't individual. It seems to me incredibly collective.
Mm. And does that mean then that it is a collective that's beyond you and your work?
Yeah, it isn't mine. I mean, in that sense, yeah. I mean, there's a tradition in certain Japanese poems where groups of people would write them. I mean, there's haka, which most people know, but haka is where you've got visual components to it, but there's also other forms of poetry that are written by up to like 10, 12 people collectively. And I feel that essence of our feeling needs to be much more collaborative. I think that, I mean, the notion of the individual artist is quite a recent one. It's only like 2.5 years old. Prior to this, artists were much more integrated with their communities, and it goes way back. They were much more integrated and central to a living community, and so the idea of the individual is very much a recent one, and it comes from this massive industrialization and consumerism that really surrounds us quite a lot.
When you make these photographs, do you have any sense that one day they will be seen again?
No, it's just to share. Just to say, look, here's this sharing, and see what you will in that sense. And I think actually a lot of these will be superseded. It's not. It's one can go to a particular form and then that's superseded. It's a little bit like.
So they're not kind of fixed then.
No.
They're not fixed in any particular paradigm. They don't belong.
No.
And yet they are collective.
Yeah, their nature. Usually nature would be the theme that's through it. So if you're asking about a thematic kind of thread, it might be nature comedy, but it's very, very tenuous. It's something that just one sees. And maybe if other people, that can be celebrated with others, that's brilliant. That's great. And I don't mean it as an individual thing, that it's kind of, it's just what calls out. I mean, the environments that these are in are they're the real thing. I mean, this is just pointing.
Is it kind of like visual hyperlinking? Like, you go into something online and you start reading partway down an article and you find something that's highlighted and you click on it. So you end up going somewhere else. And then you find yourself in another article that's also got some hyperlinks in it. So you click them and you go into another article. So you start reading that one and then so on until you find absolutely no way back.
Maybe, but it's more like the first initial thing before you go into the hyperlink, or even when you're going into the hyperlink, or you've moved on for. But all of those three things are one unitary process, which is about questioning. So it's always question, even when one's getting it, not right or whatever that means. It's opening up the space of one's of what is. Maybe. Perhaps, maybe it isn't.
Just to come back to it then, again, the sense that like there's a particular nature or flavor or sense of not knowing that, that is kind of culturally, I don't know something, that is a terrible thing, not to know. What an idiot.
Yeah. Our conditioned education system, yeah.
So when we really don't know, actually, I want to ask you: have you ever felt truly stumped? Have you ever had an experience where you've been completely flummoxed? There's that word. Flabbergasted, not able to access something.
Yeah, but it's usually around extreme things like death and birth, actuality. Like delivering your daughter, helping to deliver a baby, or being with someone when they're dying, and and I think those sort of moments of psychic opening. It's interesting. We're talking around the time of the year. Samhain would be the Celtic calendar. It's Halloween, All Souls Day. And this was actually the start of traditionally the Celtic New Year. And it's interesting. One would think, my goodness, New Year, but it's getting really, really dark. It's getting, overcast, and as we know from, Scotland, Ireland, what have you, it's the rain, precipitation, all of that comes in. But I think that kind of strangeness, that idea of Halloween, like a liminality, where the light, we're talking earlier about fog, light, dark, starts to impinge or starts to throw shadow, and the days get shorter. It's very, very interesting, because that does stump a lot of people, and they're maybe not necessarily aware that they're being stumped, so to speak.
But that reactive nature we have to being stumped, we've talked before about a moment at which one gives up into being stumped.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
Right. At which one just gives up into it, and that there's something, again, silly language. It's all we've got to communicate with, but there's a sense of incredible, profound beauty or something in that. It's just.
Well, one is stumped. I mean, this is it. If I feel I'm stumped, I usually go move from that and feel that I have been something, whereas the stumping is actually me. It feels, how far can one actually feel and engender what one is without putting, as you say, the words or the names or the feelings onto that. Mm-hmm. So the feeling of stumped is what I actually am at that point. But it's difficult sometimes because our condition is to move from it. Mm-hmm. And say, oh no, I'm stumped. Whereas the stumping can be a clue. The not getting can be a clue. But ordinarily, as you said, we want to know. We want the answer. My condition is.
Instinctively, we want to overcome. Don't we?
Yeah.
Constantly do that with everything, every day. I think everyone listening could think of something where they felt like they don't quite know, and where they've attempted to overcome that.
Yeah. And I think it's maybe remiss. There's something that's, because the not knowing is part of us as well. I mean, we are those things, but we tend to distance them. I've been angry, I've been hurt, I'm jealous, or I've been, all the things, dishonest. I mean, all of that, whatever, not as a guilt thing, but just literally the whole unfoldment of oneself is incredible. But I want to see the best aspects of me and not see the other aspects, whereas it's the total bag is there, the whole thing's there, and I think that's important.
Maybe this is too obscure, but we're even talking about being stumped, but we're also talking about it kind of with a negative context there. You're talking about something that's about thieving, or that's about I can't remember some of the things you mentioned. Sure. I wonder if we can be truly stumped by beauty.
I don't know if beauty is an interesting one, but no, I think all of it. What I meant is that whatever comes up, it's just that the nuanced aspect of oneself is usually not considered. Because I hold an idea of myself, and that what I was suggesting there was that the holistic acceptance of all of that seems to be very, very important. Beauty, I think, is nature. Nature is beauty and all of it. And it's like that feeling of vastness or something that's usually absent, that's usually negative. And it's interesting. I think negative is very, very important, like not knowing. I mean, to use a simile, you can't really. Within wet-based photography, we need the negative to use the positive to make the positive. So, in a sense, the negative is quite important. What we don't know, what I'm not prepared to look at as part of my identity or part of my engagement with nature confronting me and drawing me out. What is that? And that can only be lived. It's not an applied. It's not. That's where I think a lot of formal education tries to get the answer, which has its place in maths and that, but within art, I don't know if art has an answer as such. It has more openings. That nothing was a good one about that sort of opening of nothing, in a sense. It's quite nice.
Looking at this particular image, I'm wondering how. Were you lying on the ground when you took it? What were you doing?
No. It was just kind of there. It was like nature. It's like leaves frozen. So the sense of a momentum, like Murray's, photographs like Muybridge. He was a contemporary of Muybridge in France, but they're a sequence, Sandy, of still images, that create a movement, but they're joined together. So like it's one leaf, but one leaf at different positions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to be able to see that we go through all of these things. If you think of age, or you think of people moving or changing, the leaves are there, and again, this whole thing also, and it's maybe in one of the last photographs where this black and grey. I really like different grades of grey. I like this time of year and rain, and the different feelings of different sorts of gradients of rain, and how colour sort of is very muted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think certainly in Ireland here anyway, people don't really engage with that so much, so you don't get, I was wondering why there's a tradition of poetry and there's a tradition of literature, but there doesn't seem to be a very strong visual tradition. There is, I think it's in craft, it's in clothes, it's in architecture and vernacular buildings, but I don't know if it comes across traditionally. It usually ends up being a kind of a third-rate kind of imitation of the wider international vistas, where you do have very rich, colourful, shall we say, visual traditions, high contrasted traditions. Mm-hmm. So the notion of the closed grey relationships that you would get, as there's a guy who's keeper of material culture, I think at Queen's University, Evans, he said that it's climate that makes the people. So the climate affects people, how we look at things, how we can maybe, if we're open to it, appreciate grey, appreciate low contrast, atonal. Mm-hmm. Again, that merging, that thing about Samhain, Halloween, where distance, foreground, midground, it all merges, right? The particular, the large and the small become one. Mm-hmm. And you get that in stories, you get that in oral tradition, but in visuality, maybe you get it in certain murals. I was thinking of, I don't know, Diego Rivera, and I was thinking of 100 Years of Solitude, the book.
Yeah.
You've got this sense of the large and the small. And within Gaelic literature, there's a great tradition of that, of fantasy, of like giants and, all sorts of people and strangenesses that combine, with the so-called real. And I think that's interesting, where the perspective is lost, as not lost so much, but as
a blurred line, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's in music. I mean, it's all that whole counter harmony. It's brilliant. Sorry. Anyway. Oh yeah.
No, what are you apologizing for? We could actually, the conversation we're having now, I think we could have the same conversation at any point in any of these images, couldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. This is cut out. This is like, this is a place. I was doing a lecture thing at the Hangzhou, the Chinese, National Academy of Arts. It's the oldest it's one of the first university, in fact, Academy of Fine Art in a place called Hangzhou, sort of west of Shanghai. And one of the things that struck me was how Buddhist everything was. But anyway, I happened upon this. This is a kind of the Emperor's Lake. It was the Emperor's summer palace that he had made. And there were two people standing in this lake. You can walk around the lake. It's a massive lake. And I just like the way, again, the appearances, they look like they're cut out. It looks like the people have been removed. In a sense, you can see the kind of the ladies' shoes just at the bottom. But in looking at it, one thinks, my goodness, where are the people? They've been totally kind of vanished. And then you have these clues, like you've got, this is the Buddhist motif to the left of the male figure, is this wheel of, dharma, action. So yeah, so it's a vanishing, and then nature, which is a bit dull and moved out, is distant again. And one's led in.
This is maybe hilarious in light of my earlier mistake. I thought that there was a deliberate sense that the figures, the silhouetted figures, belonged to the horizontal black line that appears at the edge of the barrier.
It
was completely like a deliberate. I thought there was such deliberateness in this.
Right. This is just an untouched photograph. There's nothing's been done to this.
Well,
Cropped possibly, but apart from that, no, the same. No, it was the way the light caught it, and I didn't at the time. I took it away and looked at it, and I went, "Wow, look at that!" They're like, it's like yeah. It could be a simile for our human condition where we become cut out. I mean, it could be anywhere. It could be the West as well, isn't necessarily. It's China.
that's what is an emblem of togetherness, that we all belong to the same line.
Yeah, or blackness, but they're not. It's the flatness of it, I suppose. The kind of the compression of it. Yeah, in nature. And again, nature isn't really vivid; it's dull. So it's that also. It's maybe a comment. And people trying to look. What are they looking? And the posture, the way they are, they're standing. It's quite cold. So yeah.
I realise when you're talking there that I think about the photographs I've been taking in the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I've become really, really obsessed actually with contrast. And I noticed, if I look back over things on my Instagram feed, I've gone through the roof with my contrast, because there's something about trying to wring something out of an image. And I wonder where that comes from, because more recently, I've gone back to showing just what I've seen without trying to enhance it too much.
Yeah.
And obviously then the world becomes more muted. I was speaking, there was a podcast I did last weekend with Bill Wadman, and I was telling him about my original passion for colour darkroom. Mm-hmm. And this idea that you were kind of alone in the black and emerging with colour on the surface of the paper. And how, for me, fascination with colour has always given people who know me quite a lot to laugh about, because I'm absolutely not colourful in terms of what I would choose to wear or how I want to live in a space. Things have to be very, very quiet. The world does have to be turned down quite a lot. And yet in most visual art, I do, in my own work, I seem to have gone for a long time for these really heavy, saturated, highly contrasted images that might be of quiet places and spaces, but where I've amplified the noise of the colour. And in moving away from it a little bit now and coming back, well, it's not coming back, it is simply embracing the idea that there's actually still so much in colour that is not especially colourful. It's sort of revelatory that I could see the world so vibrantly without it, without having to up that visual element, that to be without it is it has its own poetry, I suppose.
Yeah, to be without colour. I like your term about wringing the tones out. I mean, in that sense of it. Yeah, I mean, so you feel, Sandy, that color's vital to you in that manner. It's just and when you're in the dark room and you're creating color, you're actually working. Photography. You're etching in light in that sense, or mark making in light. But you feel that the color is. It's literal. It's heartfelt.
Yeah. It's well, I think even we mentioned yesterday when we had our bit of a kind of a pre-discussion to this about this sense of having physical forms, physical outcomes, something to hold, not just digital.
And do you feel color does that for you?
Color, I think, has given me a sense of physicality, physical nature of something. It's interesting because I'm thinking about having an actual print, for example, and then kind of weighing that up if there was ever a point of having a comparison between an actual photographic print and then an image that's consumed on a screen. sometimes I want to be able to say that that's just about mode, and actually the art is intact. It's not disrupted by either method or medium. Colour is colour, but I suppose with, for example, screen-consumed imagery, there's a lot of backlighting, and that luminosity becomes its own language because of the light behind the image. But in physical printing with colour, it's a painterly practice.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely. Yeah. Yeah, I've never done that really, so that's good. It's good that you can. I mean, Maholanagi, when he was in the Bauhaus, did a lot of that. I mean, he did a bit of it where he, not only was he doing prints, but he was actually moving it further into like display and projections, performance almost, and 3D sculptural pieces that engaged with light and color. Sort of early happenings to an extent, but he was attempting to, develop a grammar of color. And there's been different experiments around that. Also, obviously, coming over with like synesthesia, but into music and how we use terms. I mean, they just slip over. I'm feeling blue, or red with anger, or all of that. Red with rage, green with envy. All of that. It just that maybe unconsciously shows. Thinking about the early proponents of abstract art now recognise, like Annie Besant at the turn of the century, 1901, large Leadbeater's thought forms, where they started to feel that, the colours, and within that little book, you have all of that, and it's before Kandinsky, that Besant, they didn't do the colour, but they directed it, what they were talking, and those shapes, I don't know if you know that, the thought form book, it's quite interesting, as an early exponent of abstraction and a feeling of the direction of colour. But
I've been speaking a lot also recently to younger students about colour and perception of colour, like a meditation on, we've been looking at Georgia O'Keeffe and thinking about the colour wheel, some very, very basic colour theory. And it was a kind of pin drop moment when they came up upon the realization that though we were all talking about the colour green, that actually each of them perhaps was perceiving green in their own way, and that perception is not separate to them. It's their perception of green could in actual fact be different to somebody else's perception of green. It was a very quiet classroom for a change at that moment.
Great.
I'm going to just go into this one.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that one. That's Harry Callahan, who's a teacher, the photographer. If you know his images, he did great ones of his portraits. I don't know how his partner, his wife, felt about it, but he would place them in the distance, in landscape imagery. So it's just, I suppose this is a homage to Harry Callahan, who did also abstract in nature. But they were strange images, and this runs down as well deliberately. So it's just a shadow, I suppose.
This is the one, I think, maybe out of all of them in the series, if I can call it a series, that had similar qualities, but also was like an anomaly. I suppose I could say there was a relationship. Did you do that deliberately when you were giving me the order of the images?
Yeah, I thought it would be interesting as a link, as a narrative, thing in that sense. Yeah, but it's also you don't know the shadow, the person of it, and it's a bit odd. It's a strange kind of figure.
But is that the same figure perception as them, as these people?
Yeah, it's an absence of a shadow, and the person in nature poking in there to kind of create a space. Again, the space drawing out, and the shadows, and the shadows of the trees drawing it out into this sort of landscape, this snowy landscape. Yeah. I would take it, it's more like Callahan's in a sense, his work. He does a lot of ones with with distance. They're the strangest I love them. I mean, personally, I think his portraits are amazing because you can't see the people are really in the distance, and he's in it. But also, yeah.
So this isn't simply an Alastair Herron special photo bombing moment where you've tried to get into your own image of nature.
Probably unconsciously, it's the Alastair Herron trying again. The ego will persist, Sandy.
And then, in contrast, I'm just so interested also in why you've chosen to put the images in this order. Like we've gone, I believe that I could see a relationship between this and this.
Yeah, it's linear again. It's the linearity and the nature of trees. So you've got one, yeah, and deliberately offsetting it, so it's not a rule of thirds. It's not Fibonacci system. It's not that. It's deliberately down the middle, which is unusual. So people might look at that and go, the one of the trees, like you've got this centralizing, which offsets. So it brings back the square in nature, but it's unusual. You wouldn't really see this. It denies the expectation of 1/3 to 2/3, this proportional golden mean. And it says,
I mean, you talked earlier about reading from right to left in this one. So when I looked at this one, I was reading from front to back.
Yeah, great. Right. Yeah. And also the shadow of the tree cutting right down, dividing it could be two similar images, just how you were reading the other image, Sandy, where you were saying it was great insight, where you're saying there's two. This could be the same thing. It's like a book, the spine of a book, the middle point of it. So it's like two images of the same sort of area, but nevertheless, it could be seen as being a direct division.
Isn't it strange though that, we've got this midpoint delineation, we've got right down the middle, like you say, a spine of a book. And here, when we've got the other shadow from the tree that's just slightly to the left, there's no sense of division from that. Even though, obviously it curves it, cuts itself, but nonetheless, there would still be something about line and space and the relationship between space and line. And how we choose to proportion space we see somehow to access, or again, have this sense of purchase on what we see within the image. And yet we don't, or I don't, get that from the other lines. It's only that center line, that first line. Is that I think, maybe to do with its position?
It's disrupting. I mean, one does give the illusion of perspective. Both do, in fact. Both, if you take it as two images, they both do that. But the tree, which is also a tree, so the thick spine can be the thick spine, or it can be the tree. But it doesn't allow for a compositional value. Again, the intention can be to say, look, this is not, everything isn't just, this perspective or this distantation. It's divided. It's deliberately dividing it. And I don't like the deliberate dividing. Why has he done that? Why has that been done? Why has nature done that? Why is nature using these lines when it should be, nice and, bucolic and, which it is also. So it's that questioning, that dialogue, that visual dialogue that might be appearing, for some. But yeah, one is led into it. Yeah, there is a sense of that. Yeah, as well.
Yeah, I definitely move into this. Move into the light at the back. I want to go past the line.
Yeah. Yeah, last image. This one, there was a wee bit of light on this, like just bringing out the color a little bit. This was there's a place called Slieve Commedagh. It's off the kind of southwest of Ireland. It's a place where Gaelic monks used to go to really distance themselves from the Vikings and different people. It's a very strange island. You need to get out there. This was returning from Slieve Commedagh, and this was this is a boy. This is my son actually, and with his hood up, and I just thought it was quite interesting. And the greys, if you take the kind of the sort of the aspect of the nose and the forehead as colour, and the rest grey, I mean that was the actual colour of the day.
It took me again a long time. I had to take the image off your original documentation, your Word document, and I had to put it into my own PowerPoint and look at it larger on the screen to actually see what it was. I didn't register straight away that it was a nose and a face.
Oh, really?
I thought it was a human form, but there was something incredibly, we're talking about being a bit sort of disconcerted or discombobulated.
Yeah.
I found it, truthfully, a lot of fear came up in me when I was looking at this.
Oh, really? Really? Okay, yeah. That's okay. Yeah. Well, sorry for that one, Donnie. There isn't any gender fear. It was more like also the curve of the nose and the curve of the water, and the boat had just kind of accelerated. So that isn't actually the wave. The grey to the right of Theo's, what we'll call son, his hoodie at the time. It's an old photograph, but yeah, I know it. I could see how people. Also, it's monks, and it's also the parallel between Skellig Megil and the shape of the hoodie.
Yeah.
So you have this analogy. It's a poor analogy, but there and then, and he was contemplating, which was unusual at the time. But yeah, I could see how people might think it's it could be seen to be sinister. Surely.
Well, like your image of the mountain, the illuminated mountain, this seemed to be the antithesis. Something that was emerging in the foreground rather than the background that was dark, full of dark.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you said. That it's said a lot of Gaelic poetry of the 6th and 7th century that was sort of written in different monasteries. It's incredibly nature related, and it really does. It doesn't even mention sort of, some of it doesn't even have Christian imagery within it. But the closeness to nature, the understanding of a blackbird or a mountain or the wind and, all of that, a lot of the monks actually wrote. It's very profound. It's profoundly kind of close to nature. So I think maybe one was thinking of that. And Skellig Megil is it really is amazing to get out there. It's quite difficult. But on it, the steps go up. There's no water on the island, and they'd worked out a system of drainage to capture rainwater and to live with these gulls. But but anyway, that's one of the things. It was maybe more one would need. There's more narrative in this than there would be in anything else, and around like having certain historical kind of maybe understanding. But yeah, I could see how you could think it's kind of like, I don't know,
menacing.
The menacing kind of So yeah, maybe that was a strange. Oh yeah, there's some other ones. Lure.
Yeah. There's still some to go.
That was included. Yeah, that was just in like just different lures on that nature. Not very good color. Yeah, that was just lure of I suppose earth, water, and air. It's not. It's more textural. It's more about texture than about anything else, and it isn't.
So does it not matter that we register it as land even?
No, yeah, it was more to do with texture, like the texture of flowing water, like of a quick flowing river that's in full spot.
But do you want us to identify it as water?
No, that it's texture, and that one can have these layers of texture. It's taking the notion of the line and saying that similarly, where you can have a symmetry, you can also have layers. It's more to do with textile, I suppose, or a textuality that has a specificity about color, not so much color, but texture, of water.
Is there, you said here, well, the color's not so good or something at the beginning when I flipped the slide, but actually does the texture allow something about the color to be extraordinary?
Yeah, maybe as well. I think the texture is probably brought through. Also, the kind of the man-made field, the field that has been, ploughed to the right of it. Yeah.
In showing this kind of photograph to your students, yeah, I know you're saying you want them to start thinking about layers and you want them to think about texture. But is this an instructional photograph?
It could be seen as that, which sort of, you're right. It could be seen to be instructional in the sense of, well, giving it a name like Lure, and also talking about it now, that, yeah, just unpacking it in a manner of speaking, that those textures exist. I suppose that the abstracted nature of it, if you could have that, it would have been good if there was maybe more symmetry. This sort of blocking of like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe
It could
lines.
be a competition, couldn't it? Like how many layers can you actually see in it?
Yeah, as well, and color. Yeah, you've got like stones in there as well by the side of the river. So
Because I do,
stone.
again, with younger students, I do a lot of paper cutting and paper cut forests, for example, and
Yeah.
thinking about how we divide space, how we see it as a depth space. And it's always interesting. I gave them a really, really simple landscape shot from ground level, looking over a very familiar seeming field with a line of trees in the background. And I say to them, can you colour in different layers of space
Yeah.
in different colours? And some of them will get like 3 layers, but others of them will get like 10 or 12 layers of space. And
Fantastic.
I really love the way that everybody has a unique appreciation of what space actually is. In the same way that talking to the children about, like, what is this green? Are you seeing the green? Are you seeing the space?
Yeah.
What are we seeing? Can we look at this together? Is there any, can we say ever that we are alike or different in anything? There's something quite leveling about that, actually.
Yeah, we can say that we're alike. I think that, I mean, the feel that there's a range of different materiality, different surface,
Mm,
and what does that feel like? So the feeling of different surface, even if it's visually applied. I mean, we were saying the other night, I mean, Nicolata. So the idea of like drawing, one of the things can be taught when you're drawing is to actually visualize that you're touching.
mm,
It's that synesthetic relationship between the haptic, the touched, and the seen.
yeah.
So in a sense of a feeling of what, the water seems to be prescient. I mean, there's that, it really is to the foreground in that way, and it's moving, the quality of that, and then the tree, and a little bit of the stone, and then this other field that's been harvested. What that is, what does that feel like? So it's more to maybe draw forth that nature is a sensing proposition.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe one way of looking at it. Nature's propositions. Yeah, nature's propositions again. The line, I like, it's the bottom line where you have the made. Yeah, the person made this line, which is, wire and nature. Yeah. I mean, Stiglitz was great with the equivalence of clouds.
Mm.
So that sense of you coming back to your Anthony Gormley and the fog and that total, that engagement, that immersion.
Mm.
So we have that amorphous simile, and then cut off to the right side. There's this line, this linearity. I suppose line would be the thing, Sandy. You're talking about a theme that I haven't considered that runs through some of maybe a number of these images, and that juxtaposition between I suppose, the Newtonian conditioned universe and a quantum model that is more fluid and starts to open up different possibilities of inner and outer and
Mm.
near and far, and a merging of all of that, with silence and
But there's
space.
also, kind of like a wider application, I suppose. It's a wider concern, this idea that where we don't know, or we're not sure, we can't find an answer,
Mm,
that we have maybe an instinctive return to our memory to try and make sense of things. And then when we look at that very carefully, we might say, well, our memory is simply our conditioning. And throw everything then into disarray and dreadful fearfulness for a lot of people. But also then for those who want to look, suddenly it's like the whole facade of life falls away to these spaces. And again, using the words entering the space, it's kind of a bit annoying to have to say it that way. It's the only way I can think to say it. So like we enter the space in complete silence and everything else will fall away. I think that's the sense or the essence that I would take, or I have, when I engage or when I commune, I suppose. There's an element of communality between the image and I. And take the I away and suddenly
the eye is, I think the eye is absented at vanishes.
And then this is the last image you've shared.
Yeah, planes. It's a plane. It was actually about the plane window, the window of the plane. And again, I suppose the brain and cloud and yeah. So personification and vegetable personification.
Vegetables.
And and there's actually marks on the window with this. So it was really the marks on the window, but you can't. I don't know if that can be seen.
I can't see them, and I'm not sure that anyone watching would be able to see where the
bottom you get, because it was a real grubby window. And it happened. I don't really like the flying. I mean, much with climate change and all that, but it's a long time ago. But not that that's an excuse. But so
shame on you, Herron. Anyway,
I know absolutely, Sandy. This is definitely fallen down on the job. So that's what I was doing, looking out the plane window, and that appeared, and it was just it's the mouth of Belfast Lough.
I think to kind of round up on this idea of naming your photographs is an interesting thing to do for you.
It was, Sandy. I mean, because I haven't really named them. I mean, and it was more to do. It was more like a haka. Or haga would be closer, where you have that great Chinese tradition of calligraphy and representation and poetry. I mean, coming together to unfold. I mean, that combinational aspect. So I think it could be quite interesting. I mean, there's a series of exercises that I do. I've run workshops actually at Brockwood with some of the staff and some of the students, and looking in the maturity of teacher apprentices, and looking at ways that images of natural form of nature and different aspect ratios, and putting to that certain words, certain. I think it's quite interesting, quite an interesting combination. It could just as easy, if your people want, there could be sounds as well, music. So I think, as regard in the context of naming, it would be more like, what is haka? I mean, to leave that space open, and why. There's a couple of things to show with Wallace Stevens, some of his poetry. Some poetry, I think, in particular, I don't know what it is, but like modernist stuff for me. Well, no, Shakespeare too, but American poetry, it seems to be much more clipped and concise. It's interesting that you've had that tradition of interest in Zen coming into America, maybe in the 50s and 60s, and how that rebounds. But it's quite visual, and it leaves that space open, what Haka does. So the words relating to or not relating, but maybe creating a question, creating an inquiry.
But maybe do they not at once also close down the question?
It can. It depends how people fix. Again, it's just one's attachment, my attachment to a word and what it connotates, or what my attachment to the visual and the denotation of that, whether or not it'll what evokes. But it's remaining open. How can learners, how can we, and how can I remain open? My conditioning will get in the way, but looking at that conditioning, being able to say, well, not even verbalize it, but felt. Just as you're in Anthony Gormley's, you're in the room, the weight, the mist is there, and it's the sensing, it's the physicality of it, and how that interacts with all of your body. You know, your psyche, your psychology, all of those things in that as that instant. You know, and the relationship between that space and the mist and yourself as one unitary question that doesn't arrive.
Alastair Herron.
Hi, Sandy Robertson.
You've given me a lot of your time. It's been very, very thought-provoking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sandy, for doing this. It's really, really kind of you. And yeah, you're so good. And I think just your insight in relationship to questioning, in relationship to what you do, brings out lots of things that I haven't considered. And there's a lot of kind of food for reflection. And I really thank you very much. I really do appreciate this opportunity to be in your presence as a good teacher. And for you to have to open that up as a dialogue, it's really certainly lots of things that are percolating away from this. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Alastair, and hope to speak to you again.
Without a doubt, Sandy. Thank you.